Welcome to Washington Today for Monday, June 23rd, 2025. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thank you for joining us. President Trump has made his first public comments since Iran's missile attack on an American airbase in Qatar this afternoon, saying on social media, quote, Iran has officially responded to our obliteration of their nuclear facilities with a very weak response, which we expected and have very effectively countered. There have been 14 missiles fired, 13 were knocked down, and one was set free because it was headed in a non-threatening direction. I am pleased to report that no Americans were harmed and hardly any damage was done. That from President Trump on social media earlier today. That attack was on the Al Udeid Air Base, home to thousands of American troops, fighter jets, and surveillance aircraft, and the center of U.S. operations in the region. Several media outlets reported that U.S. military officials had moved some planes and other equipment from Al Udeid amid the conflict between Israel and Iran. Meanwhile, here in D.C., two bipartisan war powers resolutions are moving their way through Congress. In the House, Kentucky Republican Thomas Massie and California Democrat Ro Khanna are leading one that blocks U.S. involvement in the Middle East. In the Senate, Virginia Democrat Tim Kaine says he plans to push for a vote this week on a similar resolution, and that Republican lawmakers in his chamber have expressed support for it. And the international response to the attack continues. British Foreign Secretary David Lammy urged Iran to return to the negotiating table, as did the foreign ministers of Italy, France, Germany, and the EU. We'll hear what they all had to say coming up. Now, here's the rest of the president's statement. Quote, most importantly, they've, referring to Iran, have gotten it all out of their system, and there will hopefully be no further hate. I want to thank Iran for giving us early notice, which made it possible for no lives to be lost and nobody to be injured. Perhaps Iran can now proceed to peace and harmony in the region, and I will enthusiastically encourage Israel to do the same. Thank you for your attention to this matter. That from President Trump on social media this afternoon. CNN reporting that the Trump administration was anticipating Iran's attack. They quote a senior White House official saying, we knew they'd retaliate. They had a similar response after Soleimani. That's a reference to Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian commander killed in a U.S. airstrike ordered by President Trump back in 2020. Now, earlier this morning, White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt took questions from reporters, including on the president's previous social media posts.
Caroline, when the president is floating the idea of regime change, how does he believe that should be accomplished? Through the Iranians, the Israelis, or the Americans?
The president's posture and our military posture has not changed. The president was just simply raising a question that I think many people around the world are asking. If the Iranian regime refuses to give up their nuclear program or engage in talks, we just took out their nuclear program on Saturday night, as you all know. But if they refuse to engage in diplomacy moving forward, why shouldn't the Iranian people rise up against this brutal terrorist regime? That's a question the president raised last night. But as far as our military posture, it hasn't changed.
Caroline, what is the timetable the president has given Iran right now to come to the negotiating table?
He has made his message to Iran quite clear.
Can I just straight to home news?
On regime change, that question of if the president was supporting that idea of having Iran's supreme leader assassinated, he's now floating this idea of regime change. Is that an idea that he would consider?
I'm not going to get ahead of the president. I just explained his truth to you last night.
Caroline, has there been any communications at all between the U.S. officials and the Iranians since these strikes? And have you gotten any indication that they are open to negotiating?
The Secretary of Defense said yesterday there has been both public and private messages sent to the Iranians since the very successful operation on Saturday night, and that remains the truth.
Strait of Hormuz, if Iran shuts down the Strait of Hormuz, is there a plan by the U.S. to add oil to the global market? We saw the Biden administration do a strategic petroleum release. Is there a plan?
I can assure you the administration is actively and closely monitoring the situation in the Strait of Hormuz, and the Iranian regime would be foolish to make that decision. We'll see you all later, okay?
White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt this morning. Here's Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, who took questions on the conflict this afternoon.
Yeah, quick question on Iran. As we have currently missiles raining down on a U.S. force in Qatar. What is your biggest concern when it comes to safety for Americans?
Well, you know, the President of the United States is making some very important decisions right now. My responsibility is to secure the homeland and to do all I can to make sure that we're identifying threats that may be here, what we can do to get in front of them before anything could happen to the population that live here in the United States, but also to work with our local governors and law enforcement to make sure that they recognize potential threats or suspicious activity. So that's what we've been. We have not seen any currently, but I do know that I'm going to leave here and go get some intelligence briefings and need to get into a secure area for some new information. So I'll know more later.
The Associated Press reporting Iranian officials saying today's attack matched the number of bombs dropped by the U.S. on Iranian nuclear sites over the weekend. Iran also said it targeted the base because it was outside of populated areas. Those comments made immediately after the attack suggested Iran wanted to de-escalate with the United States, something President Trump himself said after the strikes early on Sunday. According to the New York Times, Al Udeid is the main U.S. air operations hub in the Middle East and the biggest U.S. base in the region. It's fortified by an array of air defenses and serves as the regional headquarters for the U.S. Central Command. About 10,000 soldiers are stationed there. And just before the attack, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian wrote on social media, quote, "We neither initiated the war nor seeking it, but we will not leave invasion to the great Iran without answer." Now to the congressional response. House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries spoke to reporters today.
Donald Trump and his actions, which do not appear to be consistent with the United States Constitution, takes unilateral offensive military action without seeking the approval of the United States Congress. The use of military force, which is offensive in nature, must be approved by the House and the Senate. That's according to the Constitution. It's not optional, Donald. It's not. The framers of the Constitution actually gave Congress the power to declare war for a reason, so the American people, through their elected representatives, would have the opportunity to debate the issue and make some decisions as it relates to what's in the best interest and the national security of the American people. Donald Trump and the administration chose to ignore the Constitution. And so they're going to have to come before Congress and explain their justification for an offensive military strike against Iran. Yes, we can never allow Iran to become a nuclear power. And of course, Israel has the right to defend itself and will support Israel's security in an ironclad manner. But the Trump administration intentionally decided to ignore the aggressive diplomacy that was available to it to try to address the Iranian nuclear threat and ignore the requirements of the Constitution, and now they've got to explain why. And we expect that justification, not just at the classified briefing behind closed doors tomorrow, but we expect them to explain to the American people the basis of the strike. What were the results in terms of actually thwarting Iran's capacity to become a nuclear power? And what are the Trump administration plans to avoid another potentially disastrous war in the Middle East where thousands of American lives are potentially at risk? What is your plan to avoid another foreign war? A promise you made, a promise that Donald Trump made to the American people last year. And just like every other major promise that he made on the campaign trail, he's failed to keep it.
Leader Jeffries also talked about whether he was briefed about the attacks before they happened.
On Saturday, at the highest levels, I communicated to the White House that it was my expectation that we would have a Gang of 8 classified briefing immediately to discuss the military strike on Iran, the potential for retaliation, as well as to probe the basis and justification for the offensive military action, and to understand the damage that was actually done and whether reports are accurate that Iran may have moved significant amounts of their enriched uranium in advance of the strike, which would effectively allow them to remain in a position to become a nuclear power. That Gang of 8 briefing has not taken place. So the question is, why not? What is the administration hiding from the elected representatives of the United States Congress if they're willing to stand behind their actions? Now, our thoughts, prayers, and our full support will continue to be behind the members of the United States military who are in harm's way throughout the Middle East. That's unwavering and unequivocal support for our service men and women in the military throughout the Middle East. That is different than making sure that the Trump administration in a democracy follows the law, follows the Constitution, and does what's in the best interest of the national security of the American people.
Leader Jeffries was also asked about what Congress could do right now.
I think what's on the tool, a tool that's on the table right now, is to continue to demand that the administration present itself before the United States Congress and make the case to the American people as to why this extraordinary step has been taken. That's step one. Step two is for the War Powers Resolution, whether that's the one that has already been introduced or others that may subsequently be introduced, for those resolutions to be debated on the House floor, as should have occurred already. And then we'll see where we're at thereafter.
And as you heard, Leader Jeffries announce a classified briefing for all House members will be held tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. You can see all of his press conference at cspan.org and the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. And you heard him mention a War Powers resolutions. The Hill's Michael Schnell reporting today that House Speaker Mike Johnson said he's against that resolution hitting the floor, saying, quote, "I don't think this is an appropriate time for a War Powers resolution, and I don't think it's necessary. For 80 years, presidents of both parties have acted with the same commander-in-chief authority under Article 2. You had President Biden used it 3 times in Middle East operations. President Obama went on an 8-month campaign of bombing Libya to take down the regime there. I never heard a Democrat balk about any of that, and suddenly now they're just up in arms. It's all politics. This is not a time for politics." That from House Speaker Mike Johnson, quoted at thehill.com. Now, about that resolution, it's being led by Kentucky Republican Thomas Massie and California Democrat Ro Khanna. It would direct President Trump to, quote, "terminate the use of U.S. armed forces from Iran unless Congress authorizes such involvement." Representative Massie said on social media today, quote, "Our War Powers resolution has 57 co-sponsors. Whether you like it or not, Congress will be voting on U.S. hostilities in Iran. Under the War Powers Act, the president is required to withdraw from hostilities in Iran within 60 days unless he gets a vote of Congress." And Representative Massie talked about it yesterday on Face the Nation.
You heard from Mitch McConnell, the former Republican leader, the senator, say it was a bad week for the isolationists. He was talking about Tucker Carlson and he was talking about Steve Bannon. Do you think that the president is making a choice here, or is he trying to have it both ways? Both saying, I'm going to please the hawks of the party by bombing, but then I'm going to say I want a peace deal and make the isolationists happy by saying, you know, I'm not committing to anything more than one and done.
Well, I'll concede this. It was a good week for the neocons in the military-industrial complex who want war all the time. I wouldn't call my side of the MAGA base isolationists. We are exhausted. We are tired from all of these wars, and we're non-interventionists. I mean, this was one of the promises. I mean, are you going to call President Trump's campaign an isolationist campaign? What he promised us was we would put America first. And I think there are still voices in this administration. You've still got J.D. Vance. You've still got Tulsi Gabbard. You still, RFK Jr., you still got calmer heads that could prevail.
They were not persuasive in this case, clearly.
Well, somebody was persuasive. AIPAC is very persuasive. For instance, the Israeli lobby in Congress. If you look at my colleagues' feeds now, they all look the same. They're all tweeting the same message that we've got to support Israel and we've got to do this. My question is, does 3 bombings and we're done with Iran's nuclear ambitions? Is that the 2 weeks to slow the spread of 2025? Is this, we were told 2 weeks to slow the spread then. Now we're told it's just going to take 3 bombings. But what happens when Israel gets bombed again? Is Trump going to sit by and say, no, we're not going to further engage in this war?
Kentucky Republican Thomas Massie yesterday on CBS's Face the Nation. Now, there's a similar effort in the Senate led by Virginia Democrat Tim Kaine. He was also on Face the Nation yesterday.
Congress needs to authorize a war against Iran, this Trump war against Iran. We have not. Congress should be consulted with it. We were not. And Congress needs to be notified, not after the fact, but in advance. We were not. That's why I've filed a war powers resolution that will ripen and be brought to a vote on the floor of the Senate this week. Senator Schumer is working with Leader Thune to make that happen. The United States should not be in an offensive war against Iran without a vote of Congress. The Constitution is completely clear on it. And I am so disappointed that the president has acted so prematurely. The foreign minister of Israel said Friday night that its own bombing campaign had set the Iranian nuclear program back, quote, at least 2 or 3 years, close quote. There was no urgency that suggested, while diplomatic talks were underway, that the U.S. should take this unilateral action by President Trump's orders yesterday.
Well, the vice president was on another network earlier this morning and said, we are not at war with Iran. We are at war with Iran's nuclear program. There seems to be a lot of legal parsing on the definition of the word war here. What do you make of that description?
I think it's BS, and I think anybody hearing it would conclude the same thing. When you're bombing another nation, ask them if they think it's war. They do. Would we think it was war if Iran bombed a U.S. nuclear facility? Of course we would. And the U.S., we've invaded 2 neighbors of Iran, Afghanistan and Iraq, to topple their regimes since 2000. Those were wars.
Virginia Democratic Senator Tim Kaine on Sunday's Face the Nation. Now to the international reaction, and from Politico. Europe's foreign ministers renewed calls for diplomacy between the U.S. and Iran as they gathered in Brussels on Monday. European leaders had traveled to Geneva on the eve of the strikes to meet with Iran's foreign minister in an unsuccessful last-minute bid to de-escalate tensions. The EU's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, took questions on that from reporters today.
Hi, I'm Zeneva Rose from The National. I had a question on Iran. This morning at your doorstep, you said that at the talks in Geneva on Friday, Iran was opening up to discuss nuclear topics, but also security issues concerning Europe. Are you able to maybe tell us more about what the concessions were that Iran was ready to make when you met with the foreign minister on Friday? And second, a lot of European leaders today and also yourself have insisted diplomacy is the only way forward. Can we hope or can we expect another round of talks like those on Friday anytime soon? Thank you.
Thank you. No, I didn't speak about concessions, but I spoke about, the issues that we raised, broader security issues, of course, the nuclear program, everybody's concerned, but also, cyber and hybrid attacks that Iran is conducting against European countries, also the detention of European citizens, also their support to Russia and their ballistic missile program. So So we raised these issues, and Iran was saying that they are willing to talk about these issues. Today also there was a broad consensus among the European countries that we need to continue these discussions because diplomacy is the way to settle these things for long term, and to have an agreement with Iran to not to have a nuclear weapon and the other concerns that we also have. So yes, we will definitely stay in touch. The communication channels are opened.
She also talked about discussions she's had with U.S. and Iranian officials.
I was wondering if you could share what kind of communication you've been having with the U.S. administration about your concerns, because, we've heard you speaking a lot over the past 48 hours about de-escalation, but are you saying this directly to the Americans? Do you feel like they're listening to your concerns? And what kind of leverage do you feel the EU has in this situation? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. We are, of course, not only talking to United States, but also all the regional actors, and everybody's concerned of the same thing, which is the spillover effect that it has, security situation of the Middle East in a broader respect. Also, the question of retaliation and what kind of retaliation there is. We are sending clear messages also to Iran that it's not benefiting anybody, the escalation of this war. We are concerned of, the closure of the Hormuz Strait because it has a huge impact also for the broader trade in the world. So it is a global issue, and that's why these are global concerns.
European Commission Vice President and top diplomat Kaja Kallas. This afternoon, French President Emmanuel Macron posted on social media, quote, "I call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint, de-escalate, and return to the negotiating table. The spiral of chaos must end." Politico reporting today that Italy's Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani said he'd suggested Rome as a possible venue for U.S. and Iran talks. British Foreign Secretary David Lammy spoke about the conflict in the House of Commons today.
Britain was not involved in these strikes, just as Britain was not involved in Israel's operations. But Britain has long had concerns about Iran's nuclear program. Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. The United States has now taken action to alleviate that threat. A nuclear-armed Iran would endanger the immediate region and threaten the global community. This is a perilous moment in the Middle East, Madam Deputy Speaker. Waves of strikes between Israel and Iran have now lasted for 10 days, continuing overnight. I know the whole House will have in their thoughts the many civilians impacted by the fighting. I can confirm today this includes one British national injured in Israel. We've reached out to offer consular support. Madam Deputy Speaker, Iran has consistently failed to reassure the world that it was not pursuing a nuclear weapon. The House will recall Prime Minister Gordon Brown calling out Iran for perpetrating serial deception over years after exposure of the fortified Fordo nuclear site. Today, their enriched uranium stockpile is 40 times the JCPOA limit. Iran is enriching at 60%. Typically, a commercial nuclear reactor like that at Sizewell operates with uranium enriched at between 3 and 5%. Iran lacks any civilian justification for this level of nuclear activity, and the International Atomic Energy Agency Board of Governors has declared Iran in breach of their nuclear non-proliferation obligations.
And this from The Guardian, quote, "In the course of a 15-minute interview on BBC Radio 4, David Lammy at no point backed the U.S. airstrikes, saying he was not going to get into the issues of whether they conformed with either Article 2 or Article 51 of the UN Charter. Those are clauses that permit military action in self-defense. In that BBC interview, David Lammy did urge Iran to return to the negotiating table.
The truth is, Iran at this time has lost its air defenses. Its proxies in Hezbollah, in Hamas, are seriously weakened. They have to get serious about the off-ramp that is being made available to them by the United States that the E3 are urging. That is the nature of what we're trying to achieve.
So never mind the
this time.
legality or not, was it the right thing to do then? It sounds from what you're saying as if you do think that what the Americans did was the right thing to do because it puts added pressure on the Iranian regime.
Oh, Justin, we've always been clear in the UK, and I think the United States have been clear about this yesterday. You can only deal ultimately with the Iranian program diplomatically, and that's because the expertise still exists in the country. It is likely that some of the material still exists in the country, although we've not yet seen the full assessment of what took place on Saturday and its effect, of course, at the sites that were attacked. But in the end, this can only be dealt with diplomatically.
So was it working then? Was the diplomatic track working before the military action? In other words, was the military action a mistake, a distraction?
Well, clearly it was not working to the extent that there were 5 rounds of technical talks that Steve Witkoff led. We, as the E3, had 7 rounds of technical talks. The IE found that just a few weeks ago that Iran was not in compliance. They confirmed the 60% enrichment, and the Iranians are still obfuscating and engaging in deception.
So was the military action the right thing to do?
I said that we weren't involved in the military action.
Was it the right thing to do?
What I've said is that ultimately this can only be dealt with in diplomacy. We want to see a diplomatic. I haven't seen the assessment yet, that has not been made, of whether that has seriously degraded Iran's capability to come up with a nuclear weapons program. But nevertheless, ultimately, this has to be dealt with diplomatically. That's why I spoke to Arab partners yesterday, and I will continue to do that. That's why I was in Washington. That's why I spoke to the Iranians and urged the foreign minister for Iran to go back to Iran, take this message to the supreme leader and the Council of Advisors, and get serious now about their nuclear program, and also not escalate to start firing at US bases and set off a wider regional war.
British Foreign Secretary David Lammy on BBC Radio 4. You're listening to Washington Today.
It's a story from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. The book by Claire Hoffman is called Sister Sinner: Miraculous Life and Mysterious Disappearance of Amy Semple McPherson. FSG, the publisher, further emphasizes that the story is, quote, the dramatic rise, disappearance, and near fall of a woman called Sister Amy, who changed the world. Author Claire Hoffman, who has a master's in religion from the University of Chicago, says Amy Semple McPherson may not be known to many today, but she was a global star at the inception of global media.
Claire Hoffman with her book Sister Sinner: The Miraculous Life and Mysterious Disappearance of Amy Semple McPherson, on this episode of Book Notes Plus with our host Brian Lamb. Book Notes Plus is available on the C-SPAN Now free mobile app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Washington Today. Some of the nation's top lawyers were on Capitol Hill today. Attorney General Pam Bondi testified on the president's 2026 budget request for the Justice Department. She appeared before a House Appropriations Subcommittee. That request includes nearly $3 billion in proposed cuts and aims to consolidate several DOJ offices. She began the hearing talking about her department's goals.
My primary objective as Attorney General is to return the department to its core mission of keeping Americans safe and vigorously enforcing the law. This budget will allow us to continue doing just that. Since January 20th, we have dismantled deadly fentanyl networks across our country. We prosecuted MS-13 and TDA members using terrorism and RICO charges. We've seized thousands of illegal guns from cartels and extradited key cartel leaders into U.S. prisons. Last month, the FBI arrested 205 child predators in a single operation, and the DEA executed the largest fentanyl bust in the history across 4 states. We have also surged FBI resources to investigate thousands of violent crimes committed against American Indian and Alaskan Native people. These are just a few examples of what we've achieved thus far. The budget will allow us to continue doing our crucial work. We've also led the charge to enforce our immigration laws, rebuild our immigration system after 4 years of chaos, help secure our nation's borders, moreover. We must guarantee that our laws allow us to process, hold, and remove those who enter our country illegally.
Now, during the hearing, Full Appropriations Committee Ranking Member Rosa DeLauro asked the Attorney General about cuts she's proposing to funding for crackdowns on illegal drug and gun trafficking.
How many ATF law enforcement officers and industry operations investigators do you anticipate will be lost to attrition as a result of this funding reduction you're proposing?
So, I am a career prosecutor, and I believe in keeping America safe, making America safe. First, what we're doing is ATF is going to be brought over with DEA. Everyone knows, everyone sitting up here, guns and drugs go together. They go together. We're going to make it more efficient. What I will tell you will not be happening is ATF agents will not be knocking on the doors of legal gun owners in the middle of the night asking them about their guns. They're going to be out on the streets. If I can finish, they're going to be out on the streets.
I have three
No.
minutes.
You asked me a question.
I did. And
you asked me a question.
And you
and I'm
haven't
gonna
answered my
it.
question.
So they're going to be out on the streets working
You haven't
hand in hand
answered my
with
question.
DEA
You
to
haven't
violate.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like an answer to my question. And the question is not being answered. How many ATF law enforcement officers and industry operations investigators do you anticipate will be lost to attrition as a result of the funding reduction you are proposing? You are proposing a 26% cut to ATF for fiscal year 2026, as well as a 4.4% cut to DEA. So you're going to merge the two agencies together, and then you're going to shortchange their resources, so neither one of them will be able to do the job that they have been designed to do. You've got a 34% cut to the high-intensity drug trafficking areas program, no dedicated money at all for the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. So, my view, it's fair to say that the Trump administration proposal shortchanges federal efforts to stop illegal gun trafficking and federal efforts to stop the flow of dangerous illegal drugs like fentanyl.
As I was attempting to answer your question very calmly, unlike you,
Excuse me, Madam Attorney General. Answer yes or no. Tell me what the numbers are. I don't want to hear all of your filibuster about this. Go ahead, please. Tell us the numbers.
So we are reorganizing. ATF agents want to be out on the street.
Okay,
working
let me answer the
DEA
question for you.
agents.
I'm going to answer it for you. Page. Mr. Chairman, you give me a certain amount of time, and I have a high respect for you, but I don't have to listen, nor do my colleagues have to listen to a filibuster when it's a simple question.
Full Appropriations Committee Ranking Member Rosa DeLauro and Attorney General Pam Bondi today at a House Appropriations Subcommittee hearing on the President's 2026 budget request for the Justice Department. Meanwhile, elsewhere on Capitol Hill, a group of Democratic state attorneys general spoke before a meeting led by House and Senate Judiciary Committee ranking members and Democratic members. The attorneys talked about the lawsuits many of them had filed against the Trump administration for what they consider unconstitutional acts. Here's Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison.
Many of the things that Donald Trump has been trying to do by executive order could be done. But one would need to introduce a bill to abolish the Department of Education. You need to introduce a bill to get rid of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. You would need to change the Constitution through the legitimate process that exists to get rid of birthright citizenship enshrined in the 14th Amendment. What you can't do as president is issue an executive order like a edict or a proclamation to just change American laws. And so state AGs, along with many others, have stood up to defend the system of law. In February, state attorney generals sued the administration over illegal executive order that would end federal funding to medical institutions that provide gender-affirming care and potentially criminalize the provision of it. The order violates separation of powers, your powers, the Equal Protections Clause of the Fifth Amendment, the 10th Amendment, and the court later imposed a preliminary injunction that blocks the order in the plaintiff states. In April, we sued the Trump administration over their threats to cut federal funding to Minnesota schools if we did not comply with 2 executive orders purporting to ban transgender children from playing sports in schools, broadly deny the civil rights of transgender people. We sued for 2 reasons. One, they were wrong on the law. The orders and threats violate the separation of powers, the 10th Amendment, and Title IX itself. And we sued because this is bullying, plain and simple.
Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison speaking with other Democratic AGs this afternoon on Capitol Hill. The other AGs at this event, Andrea Campbell of Massachusetts, Kwame Raoul of Illinois, and Matthew Plotkin of New Jersey. You can see all of that event and today's appropriations hearing with Attorney General Pam Bondi at cspan.org and the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. That's also where you can find this program as a podcast. It's also on YouTube. Just search Washington Today. And for more on the stories that are shaping Washington every day, get our daily email word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Starakoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.